So today I want to talk about Their Eyes Were Watching God, chapters 1 through 6. We've talked before about how the first paragraph of a short story, or the first paragraphs in a novel, are very significant in creating meaning. And so I want to talk about the first two paragraphs of the novel in general. The first one, ships at a distance have every man's wish on board. For some they come in with the tide. For others they sail forever on the horizon, never out of sight, never landing, until the watcher turns his eyes away in resignation, his dreams mocked to death by time. That is the life of men. Think about the men that we encounter in the novel. So we've met so far Logan and Joe. We've heard reference of tea cake, and then we have the men in the town in general. Does this quote apply to them? Are there some men who contradict this quote? Are there differences in genders between men and women? In the first chapter, we see that men have a very different reaction to Janie compared to the women, who seem a little bit more jealous. So what does the author mean? Ships at a distance. Do men just kind of see the ships on the horizon, and if they come in, awesome, and if they don't, do men just kind of shrug? And then what does the quote mean about women? Now, women forget all those things they don't want to remember, and remember everything they don't want to forget. The dream is the truth. Then they act and do things accordingly. Think about the women we meet in the story. Janie, of course. Phoebe, Janie's grandmother. We hear a little bit about Janie's mother. What does this observation about women mean? Is Janie creating her own dream and her own reality? As the story goes on, I want you to keep this in the back of your mind and think about how it fits. We've already talked about chapter 1 a little bit. We've looked at the way the men seem to be attracted to Janie and her physical appearance, and how the women seem to be jealous as a result, and they've stored up all these things that they have to use as ammo against her. Think about the author's observations. Think about our current society. Think about society in the story. And think about those two opening paragraphs, and do they fit? As a child, Janie was open-minded. She earned the nickname Alphabet because so many people gave her different nicknames. She always seemed open to try new things, but at the same time, she never fully fit in. So when she was with the white children, she never fit in fully. But then again, she wore hand-me-downs from Miss Washburn, which made her seem better than her peers, so they would often ostracize her at school. There was a lot of gossip, for example, about her father, and her friends always focused on the negatives and not any of the positives. At the same time, Nanny imposes her views. So, for Nanny, Logan provides a stable life, which is more than Nanny had. Because of Nanny's background, escaping slavery and rape, an old farmer seems like an appealing husband, even if he makes you work on the land. But Janie never really had the experiences that Nanny had. And so, as she notes, Logan was desecrating her vision of the pear tree. Now, we talked about the blossoming pear tree before in class. This is really what she uses to base everything that she does in her life. In chapter 3, of course, Janie blatantly mentions that Logan's image is desecrating the pear tree. The language that she uses is almost, but not quite, comical. He's just described as disgusting. He's unevenly shaped. He doesn't wash his feet. She goes on. And of course, even the narrator is showing us the imagery through Janie's eyes. And so she doesn't appreciate Logan for any of the reasons that her grandmother does. For Nanny just wanted a safe place where she grew up, in slavery, where she had to run from her life with a newborn so that she could escape the angry slave owner's wife. Working on a farm is nothing. It's a perfect life. There's security. Even though Logan is older, Janie will be set for life, and Janie can't see that. So in general, they just have different outlooks on life. They've had different backgrounds, and they don't quite see eye to eye. Janie is a little bit more privileged, obviously, than her grandmother and than her mother, and so since she's never had to endure some of the hardships they've had to endure, she doesn't fully understand where they're coming from. So to her, it just looks like her grandmother's trying to ruin her perfect vision of the pear tree and the perfect love that marriage will become. The chapter ends with Janie's first dream was dead, so she became a woman. What is this implying about becoming a grown woman? Is the author implying that a lot of times people have to accept disappointment. Think about you all as teenagers. Do you have some kind of very idealistic view of the world, something similar to a pear tree? You want to go out and change the world and do something about it. Do you think if that dream doesn't come to fruition, your first dream, quote, is dead, and so you become a grown woman or a grown man? Is that what the author is implying? Look at the grown characters in the novel. Do they support this? Before long, Logan stops seeming intrigued by Janie. Things just become normal. He doesn't really appreciate her that much. In the chapter, there's talk of him buying another mule so that she can work the land as well. We've already looked at mules. They become sort of a motif in this book, if you haven't noticed. In Chapter 1, the townspeople of Eatonville felt that mules occupy their bodies during their day jobs. They're not allowed to be themselves. They have to basically be physical laborers. And this motif continues. Janie is given no choice to work on the farm. Logan decides he's going to buy a mule. And it's in that context, where Janie is not given a choice, that Joe appears. And he's different. He's described as, quote, citified, stylish. He has silk sleeve holders. Their discussion about sugar water can also be read as a little bit of symbolism. Regular drinking water, it's practical only. It's something maybe Logan would drink. But sugar water implies that Janie and Joe, who both enjoy it, they each want a little something extra. They feel like maybe they're entitled to something extra, or they're searching for something beyond the ordinary. There is an important quote before Janie decides to leave with Joe. Janie pulled back a long time because Joe did not represent sunup and pollen and blooming trees, but he spoke for far horizon. So we're given that image of the horizon that was introduced in the first 2 paragraphs of the novel. And although Janie recognizes even here that Joe is not perfect, he is much closer to her dream than Logan. If she stays on the farm with Logan, she basically knows what the rest of her life is going to be like. And so she decides to leave. On page 32, she realizes, quote, from now on, she was going to have flower dust in springtime over everything, a bee for her bloom. So she's a little bit hopeful, at least, that perhaps her life with Joe will give her that pear tree vision that she really wants for herself. Chapter 5. Remember the quotes at the beginning of the novel? So, Joe arrives in Eatonville and he finds no one has truly taken initiative. So are the men of the town acting like the men described in the first paragraph of the novel? It's something to think about. On pages 38 and 39, the townspeople discuss their lack of ambition compared to Joe's. They mention that they're keeping themselves down. And it takes someone like Joe to buy extra land, to organize a general store, to organize the post office, to make things better. Page 41, there's an important quote. Joe provides Janie with a store-bought dress. Everyone else has nice dresses, but they're homemade. They're a little bit more modest. But Janie has this very fancy dress, and there's a quote. She must look at on herself as the bell cow. The other women were the gang. And Joe, even now, wants to set Janie aside. And it seems like her whole life, Janie has been trying not to be set aside. As a kid, she was ostracized by her friends, or from her friends, because she looked different. She looked a little bit better than them. And Joe is really doing the same thing. On page 43, he doesn't let her speak even when the town requests that she speaks. And he says, quote, she's a woman and her place is in the home. Janie hasn't really thought about whether she wants to speak or not, but she's immediately resentful at not being even given the chance. On page 46, she remarks to Joe that being mayor, quote, keeps us in some way we ain't natural with one another. So, like her experience as a child, Joe's choice of fancy things keeps her ostracized from the town. It makes her formal even in her relationship with her husband. And so this is not the pear tree. Remember the pear tree? Everything is natural. It's kind of transcending the 5 senses. Nothing is forced. And with Joe, it's kind of the opposite of that. So her marriage to Joe is not quite what she expected. The town, although they admire Janie and Joe, there is that little edge with Janie and Joe being seen as better than them. Joe buys fancy things, and it makes the townspeople think that maybe they're not good enough to even know that these fancy things exist. Janie is somewhat happy with Joe at times, But overall, she's becoming very quickly in these two chapters, chapters 5 and 6, very quickly unhappy. So in chapter 6, we see a lot of things that show us Janie's unhappiness. A lot of the chapter deals with Sam's mule. So this is this mule, poor mule. Sam doesn't feed him. The townspeople joke about it. They joke that the mule's rib cages are sticking out so much that the women use the rib cages to do their laundry and things like that. Joe, even though he doesn't approve of such lowly banter, he's the mayor of the town, he enjoys listening, and Janie simply wants to listen and joke with everyone else. But Joe reprimands her, and he says, quote, "They don't even own the house they sleep in, just some puny humans playing around the toes of time." And so once again, Janie's kept apart from everyone else. She also dislikes working in the store. So remember, she didn't like working the land with Logan because he didn't give her a choice. He just decided he was going to buy her a mule and just make her work the land. It's the same thing with the store. She doesn't mind it so much, except if too much math is involved. She doesn't like trying to figure out these word problem type orders. Let me get 10 cents worth of this product. To her, it's, quote, a waste of life and time, on page 54. Adding to that oppression is the head rag on page 55. Definitely an important symbol. Joe has her wear the head rag because he saw someone else admiring her hair, and yet he never tells her that it's because of jealousy. So even though he's acting in a way that I guess could sort of be described as stemming from love, he doesn't take that passion and explain to her that he's jealous and that he's being a little bit possessive of her, but it's because he loves her. He never says that. And so she remains apart from him. On page 57, Janie remains quiet. Even though she wants to say things, she thinks to herself, "But I hate disagreement and confusion, so I better not talk. It makes it hard to get along." Later on in the chapter, Joe does he buys the mule to free it and make Janie happy. And when Janie then gives him a speech in response, a townsperson who overheard the speech says, quote, "Your wife is a born orator, Starks. Us never known that before." So when Joe's being nice, it allows Janie to be herself. But then very quickly after that, we're reminded that he's repressing Janie's potential. She is a good speaker, and if she were asked to give a speech to the town, as she was in an earlier chapter, she might have said something really amazing, but Joe never gave her that chance. Even though he did something nice for the mule and made Janie happy, she's not allowed to attend the mule's funeral. The whole town attends, and they're kind of joking around again, just the regular banter. But she's held above that by her husband, and so the townspeople believe that she is above them, and that's not the impression that she wants. The last line of the chapter definitely emphasizes his repression of her. He tells her that she's becoming too mouthy, so every time she tries to be herself, she's repressed. And so in these chapters, really think about that pear tree vision, the reason that Janie left Logan, and the reason that she went along with Joe. Is Joe fitting any of those ideals that she had in the pear tree? And also think about, should Janie be a little bit more proactive? What's going on with her identity? Does she know? Does she recognize what's wrong? Is there something she could be doing or saying that would make things better? And if she's not, why isn't she?